Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. I am super excited to be coming to you today with another research themed tip musing. I think it's gonna be a tip. Definitely something that you can use, something that I use in my daily life for sure. And that is 5 questions you should ask absolutely anytime you see a fact or something that says research finds or study shows, like any of those big headlines or reports that are saying like, hey, research, a study, the scientific community has found this thing. To me, anytime I see a like fact or finding introduced that way, I actually pause and I'm like, like sure, let's dig in. Let's see how truthful and legit this actually sounds. And that's so cynical and like skeptical, which is very much, I don't know, I think I'm like an optimist. I try to like really believe people and take things at face value. But what I have found in the research community and also in media and just how things get picked up and reported is that a lot of information, I don't know the exact purpose, like sometimes perhaps, clickbait or to like sound more interesting or make people's work look more favorable. Facts and figures get tweaked or taken out of context or just reported in a way that's not necessarily giving you the full picture. And something that I am really passionate about is ethical and transparent and just like respectable research. And that's important when you are creating research, and it's also important when you are consuming research, right? Like when you are building your knowledge, it's also really important that you are able to ask questions and take stock of the information that you're coming across. So this is wildly oversimplified, but I think even just asking these 5 questions about these facts, studies, findings, news article headlines that you come across will be really helpful and just help you to think a little bit more critically and to decide on your own with all the relevant facts, or because you don't have all the relevant facts, whether or not you want to believe something, whether or not you should act on this information, whether or not the information is relevant to you and your work and your life. So, I've mentioned this in a video before. I call this like the nutrition label for facts. I think if you produce information, you should report this. I think if you consume information, you should very easily have a rundown of this. And it is the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why. If I can't find those 5 things for a fact or a finding, a result that I've come across, I am immediately much more skeptical. I'm also a little annoyed because I know I'm going to have to go digging and looking for that information in order for me to decide whether or not I want to believe what's being reported. And it's something that I just think we all could do. I'm a researcher, I produce research. I would happily slap a nutrition label on all of my reports, and I try to be really transparent in reporting all these things. And I think the key, I know the lesson like I'm learning and that I'm working on is making this information like very simple and digestible and like easy for people to find so that they don't have to read the whole, 10 page, that's like that's a very conservative estimate, but like 50, 100 page report to like dig up all this information. It should just be really quick up front. So perhaps after you learn about these 5 things, you want to join me in advocating for these. I think it's, again, really important. So let's dive in. What are the 5 W's specifically? First W, who? Who did this information come from? I want all of the details. How many people did it come from, and what are their key characteristics that are like relevant to what you're reporting? Like, what is their age? What is their gender? What is their race, ethnicity? Is there relevant information about the type of job or profession that they are in? Any key characteristics, any details that could influence whether or not this result is reputable or whether it's relevant to me and my life. I want all of that information up front. Allow me to give an example of why the who matters, right? If you are reading a report, and this is like, I'm just totally making this up, so these are not real facts or figures. If you are reading a report that says 75% of people like, I'm just going to say XYZ, so we don't even put misinformation out there. 75% of people like XYZ, and you're a business owner and you don't sell XYZ, and you're like, oh, like so many people like XYZ, maybe I should add that to my repertoire. What if you dug in deeper and the who were people who are not within the age range of people your business targets? So maybe they got all the information from people in their 20s, and you typically work with people who are in their late 30s, early 40s. Okay, that 75% of people liking XYZ is no longer that relevant to you. And it also kind of seems like a vastly overstated statement for only looking at like a small subset of age. And that doesn't even get into other key factors like race, ethnicity, gender, profession, right? All those things could influence whether or not that fact seems true to you or whether it seems relevant to you. So, who? Ask who. See where the information came from. Second W, what? What kind of information is this? Was this information from a survey? Was it from an interview? Was it from a focus group? Was it from the census? Was it administrative data? There are a lot of different ways people get data, and some data is better suited to answering certain questions or to making certain facts seem actually truthful. So like knowing where that information came from can really shape whether or not, again, you find it to be credible or whether you find it to be relevant to your work. And to me, like the absolute bonus here, which would be so cool if more people did for many, many reasons, would be sharing the actual questions or the tool that people used to collect that data, right? And when I say tool, I mean something that's doing the work of a question without being a question. Like if it's reporting on something from a checklist, it'd be really cool to see the actual checklist that someone used. And so to give an example here, if you are reading something and it says, we learned that 80% of teachers did a really good job supporting social emotional learning in their classroom. Okay? And that's the finding. So in order to like unpack like my thoughts about this finding, I would want to know, did you find that, was it like a self-report survey? Can I look at the questions you'd ask those teachers to figure that out? Was it that you did an observation and you observed different ways that they were supporting social emotional learning in their classroom? If so, like what were those ways, and like what type of rubric or checklist did you do to evaluate that? Like this is all really critical nuance that goes into that like one sentence quick fact that people are reporting. The third W, when. When did you get this information? Is it from last week or is it from 1999? What season is the information from? Was there anything important going on in like current events or historical context that could shape the information that you are reporting? This to me is so critical. There was an article that I read, this was a couple months ago, but I'm telling you, there are a lot of articles like this, and it was reporting data like in real, like it is happening now, like 2021, and the information was actually based on records from like, I want to say it was like over 30 years ago, right? But because of the timeline of research and people looking at like historical data and things like that, you know, sometimes data is old, and it doesn't mean that we can't learn anything from it. But to me, I would think very differently about something that was learned based on data from like last month as compared to data from like October 1999, right? And again, even like the seasons or current historical events, those are important context to understanding this information that's been collected, and it could shape whether or not you find it credible, and it could shape whether or not you find it relevant. So I think it's really important to know when, and this goes for if you're reporting things out. If you run a business and you've been around for 5 years, and in year one, you surveyed everyone you worked with, and 100% of people absolutely loved your work, that was 5 years ago. Like, I actually kind of want to know, like, if you surveyed people in the past 12 months, and like, do people like in today's day and time still really love your business, right? Like, don't outdated data, I personally would interpret and think about that very differently than something that is up to date. So I want to know when. Fourth W, where? Where did this information come from? Geography. Like drop a pin. I want to look up where did this data come from in the world? Is it from the US? Is it from Canada? Is it from Australia? Is it from India? Is it from Mexico? Different places have different sets of circumstances. And oftentimes we read things and it's like, people think this. And it's like, well, what people? If I would think very differently about a finding of like from people in like my local community as opposed to a finding that was done in Australia, because Australia has a totally different set of like contextual factors than if they were doing the survey right here where I am in Charleston, South Carolina. It makes a difference. And again, it's not that you can't learn from data that is in different countries. I think it's incredible to look at data from different countries and to compare and contrast data from different countries. That's amazing. But the point is when you're deciding like, is this credible and is this relevant to me? You want to know, where did this come from? Where did it come from? Last W number 5, why? Why did you collect this information? So this is like you, again, like you're asking as if you could ask the researcher who did this, like, why did you collect this information? What is the purpose behind this research? What are the overarching questions that are being answered with this information? Findings are misused, right? People use facts to, I keep wanting to say like facts because I'm like, is it really a fact or not? But people use information to manipulate and to scare people, and digging into the intended use of information and any biases that could be embedded in that, and just like any like agenda, secret or not so secret, that come with that information is really critical in making a decision about whether or not this is good information that, again, that you should be using for decision making or that you should take very seriously. Because our biases, like we could have good biases or bad biases, but we all have biases based on our life experience and based on what we hope to accomplish in this world, things like that. And that can impact our information. Even numbers, right? Like numbers. Oh, I'm so glad I can finally say this because I've been thinking about this quote for so long. But the other week, MC Hammer tweeted something that I think is very relevant to what I'm trying to say now with this question of why. And he said, I hope this is like verbatim, it's pretty close, but when you measure, include the measurer, right? Like we are part of these measures, whether they're qualitative, like collecting stories through interviews or observations, or whether they're quantitative, like surveys or tests and just like other numbers. We are part of the information that we collect. And when you read other information, the people who collected it are part of that information. And so you have to consider the intention and what they're bringing to the table. This is one of the reasons why when you see like products that are like independently tested or third party evaluated, and the idea is that you want someone who doesn't have an agenda to say this thing works to collect the information. And so if you're digging in and seeing like, oh wow, like the company that made this is saying it's great, I might think a little bit differently about that than if a independent organization who has nothing to gain or lose by the product being good or bad collected the information. I would think differently about that, right? And the point with all of these W's, the who, what, when, where, why, is that you as a consumer of information should have access to the answers to all of these questions in order to decide whether or not this research, this information, this data, this fact is credible or relevant. And similarly, if you are a researcher, if you are stepping into the role of researcher and producing this information for your organization, your product, your company, whatever, it's on you. Like you have a responsibility to share this information with people, and it can be an incredible tool for building trust with people and to showing transparency and being like, hey, like this is who we talk to, here's where they're from, here's some key details about them that you want to know. here's what we asked them, this is when we did it. And like, now do you believe what we're saying, right? It's like you're presenting a case and you're also having a conversation and you're allowing people to make their own decision based on all of the relevant context. And I can't stress that enough, because all findings, facts, data points have context. And in certain contexts, they could be really credible and really reputable and really useful. And that same beautiful, amazing piece of information could be utterly useless and not relevant in another context. So we really need to work on like having the context. I want so many context clues to interpret your information, your research, your finding. And something that really irritates me about especially like media these days, but I see it in reports from organizations that they're generating to raise funding or to, mostly to raise funding, or just to like report on what they're doing, is that, people use the research says or study finds as like carte blanche to say whatever afterward. It's like, well, this was research, so all this must be true. And then if you're reading it, it's like, oh, well, like research found this, so this must be true and it must be relevant. And that's just not accurate, right? And I get why people might not want to be forthcoming about all these things. I think some people like unintentionally are not forthcoming about this. Like they just don't even think about making this all available up front because it's not on their radar. And okay, fine. Some people might think about this and be like, oh, well, like it doesn't sound as good if we tell people we only talk to 10 people. So like let's just not say how many people we talk to. Or I'm thinking another report I read the other week where it was like basically like they only talked to like their friends essentially. And it's like, well, of course they don't want to say they only talk to their friends because now that seems like a biased sample, right? And to me, this level of transparency, like I get why it might seem scary because people could find out like, oh my gosh, like small sample, only surveyed people you were friends with, your data's from 10 plus years ago, or like your survey questions were like not perfect. No ones are perfect, that's okay. But I want to tell you that like you showing up and being like, we did the best we can in this moment. When we know better, we'll do better, right? Like we just want to build trust. We want to have this conversation with you. We know this isn't perfect, but from this imperfect information, here is what we've learned. Here's all the context you need to decide what you think about what we've learned. I honestly, like any day of the week, I would choose to support research that is transparent and erred on the side of being cautious in its reporting over this like big sexy finding that is like really stretching the truth or just being kind of like elusive with where it came from. I mean, to me, this is just like a fundamental right that we should have as humans. Like we deserve to make decisions based on quality information. We deserve to make decisions based on having all of the facts, and we deserve to have conversations about where information comes from and what contributed to developing that information, and just really be like critical consumers and producers of that information. So next time you read a fact, next time you see research finds or study shows, or you're going through a grant report or an impact report or whatever it is, look to see if you can find this information. Who, what, when, where, why. Once you've taken stock of all those things, think about whether or not you want to believe what's being put forward or what additional questions you have based on the answers to those questions. I do this, again, I do this in my daily life all the time, and I'm not always satisfied with the answers to that question, but like that's information in and of itself. I hope you found this helpful, trying to do my part to help us all become better consumers and producers of research and information so we can make better decisions that are credible and relevant. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll be back soon with another new video.